The history of tank development has experienced several major technological shifts, each time pushing the performance of tanks to new heights and cementing the throne of the tank as the land dominator. If the French FT-17 Renault light tank in World War I ignited the technological line of modern tank design, then the Christie suspension can be considered the second leap in tank technology. The tank designed by Christie himself, the T3 tank, is even hailed as a technological achievement ahead of its time. Tanks have always been Christie's main research focus. In 1919, he submitted a dual-use tracked and wheeled tank to the US military, but it was not adopted due to its lack of technological breakthroughs. Later, he presented the M1921 model, but the response was still mediocre. In 1928, Christie debuted his masterpiece, the Christie suspension. This tank, named the M1928 and equipped with the new suspension, performed even worse than the previous design. The new suspension was too wild, causing the tracks to be unable to withstand high-speed driving, leading to frequent breakage or detachment. Additionally, the vehicle had a high rate of mechanical failure and lacked a rotating turret. Despite this, the US military still saw the potential of the M1928 in high-speed driving. Perhaps unwilling to spend money, the US military only gave Christie a verbal promise, hoping he would improve the design, and promised a reward of $54,500. For complex weapons equipment like tanks, there is usually a research and development budget allocated, but the military's treatment of Christie was more like letting him go, and the tight funding situation may have been the main reason why Christie later sold the suspension to several other countries. As for how Christie sold the suspension to other countries, let's not discuss that for now. Christie himself still held great hope for the US military's promise. In 1931, he improved the design and presented the M1931 tank, which the US military named the T3. The T3 had two main versions, the T3E1 and T3E2, with the latter being a redesigned upgraded version. The production quantities were 7 and 5, respectively. Later, the T3E3 was also designed, but it was not considered successful. The T3 naturally used the more mature Christie suspension, with 4 pairs of large-diameter bogie wheels, the drive sprocket at the rear, and the idler wheel at the front. It was powered by a 338 horsepower Curtiss V12 gasoline engine, with maximum speeds of 75 and 44 km per hour in wheeled and tracked modes, respectively. The T3E2 increased the power to 435 horsepower, with corresponding maximum speeds of 96.5 and 56 km per hour. This level of mobility was simply flying at the time. The tank's armor was very thin, with a maximum thickness of only 4.7 mm, thinner than most armored cars. This design was likely Christie's attempt to reduce the weight of the vehicle to highlight its mobility advantage. On the T3E2, the armor thickness was increased to 6 to 12 mm, which was a reasonable sacrifice considering its higher mobility. In terms of weapon configuration, Christie incorporated the experience from the M1928 and specifically designed a rotating turret, with the main weapon being a short-barreled 37mm gun and an additional 7.62mm auxiliary machine gun. The T3E2 increased the number of auxiliary weapons to 5, while keeping the main weapon unchanged. As Christie's masterpiece, the T3 was introduced a few months earlier than the BT Fast Tank series. Although few people know this now, it caused a great shock in Europe and America in the early 1930s. At the time, the maximum speed of tanks in other countries was only 30 to 40 km per hour, making them seem slow compared to the T3. Except for the proud French, many other countries sought to obtain this technology through various channels. However, the T3 did not fare well in the United States, largely due to the military's unclear positioning of armored weapons. There was an ongoing debate within the US military about the use of tanks, with some believing they should conduct flanking and infiltration maneuvers like cavalry, while others believed tanks should operate with infantry, acting as mobile fortresses. The result of this dispute was that the tank design department did not know how to design tanks to meet the requirements. The military even requested Christie to redesign a tank that met their needs, but there was continuous disagreement over the specific specifications. Christie, who had been dedicated to promoting tanks to the U.S. military, refused their request this time, gradually fading out of the tank design industry. Although the T3 did not make it into the history books, it received unexpectedly high praise at the time of its introduction. Its predecessor, the M1928, was referred to as the M1940 by some military magazines, suggesting that the M1928 and T3 were 10 years ahead of the world. The Christie suspension was also called the only bright spot in the U.S. tank industry during the two world wars. As Christie's own design, the T3 was at the forefront in terms of practicality and performance, but unfortunately, he was not able to create a classic tank generation.